2-2.2 Our Human Enemies. Fighting the government doesn't make you an anarchist. Some who fight authority do so only because they wish to have the power of the authority for themselves. There are as many flavors of enemies as there are enemies. It's important not to fall into collectivist thinking, either in the positive nor the negative direction. In other words, one should reject the idea of assuming everyone who fights a current government is a friend, just like one should reject the idea that everyone who is not a philosophically perfect anarchist is an enemy. Many people can do things that would seem to place them in the category of friend, but if they were to obtain the slightest political power, they would quickly become a more dangerous enemy than the ones currently in charge. Likewise, a person can take actions that would seem to flag them as enemies, but they are simply confused neutrals making bad choices. So before we label someone as an enemy, we have to be sure of their intentions. Also, in labeling an enemy, the input of multiple opinions is valuable. In short, be slow to judge, as this judgment can have deadly consequences. As important as it is to discriminate when we choose who to trust, we must discriminate when choosing who to condemn. Having said that, we must also reject some commonly held beliefs. It is often said, "Keep your friends close and your enemies closer." This old saying comes to us in modern times from the writings of Niccolò di Bernardo di Machiavelli, an Italian politician, diplomat, and philosopher. Basically, an advisor to our enemy. Not to say we can't learn from Machiavelli. We most definitely can, but Machiavelli was not writing from the perspective of ripping the prince down. He was writing from the perspective of keeping the prince in power. Machiavelli was advising a prince on how to behave in a way to maintain his monopoly of violence. That is the opposite of our design. Good advice for a prince is not by default good advice for everyone. We must be more like the spider mentioned in section 2-2.1.2 above. Ideally, we want to be near the prince, if possible, serving him a bowl of soup or driving him to his dentist appointment, but we should try to be in that position in a way that he doesn't notice we exist or doesn't recognize us as the threat that we are. As a general rule, the use of physical violence upon the person or persons of our enemies should be avoided by the friend saboteur. This is not a hard rule set in stone. It is guidance that should be taken into consideration when making that decision. This should not be taken to mean that there should never be violence used against our enemies. It is simply stating that wisdom should dictate when to strike and what method will provide the best result. Eventually, there will be physical violence upon specific targets by those engaging in irregular warfare, but we won't be covering that in this section of this manual. For more on irregular warfare, see the publication Sedition, Subversion and Sabotage, Field Manual No. 1, Ethics-Based Irregular Warfare. For our purposes in this section of this manual, we can classify the three types of enemies that the friend saboteur should concern himself with. 1. Those who order issues to rob, intimidate, cage, maim, and kill to maintain the state's murderous grip on humanity. These people should be our primary human targets when using simple sabotage. They may be high-level bureaucrats, politicians, military officers, judges, or high-level law enforcement. If it's possible to positively identify the shadow government actors, then they would be at the top of this category. Once again, as tempting as it is to resort to direct violence, wisdom must rule our actions. Our main goal is to disrupt their plans, distract their attention, and generally place Legos in the carpet of their life to keep them stumbling in the dark. 2. Those who choose to obey and execute above stated orders. These people are the frontline police, military, prison guards, mid to low-level bureaucrats, building inspectors, health inspectors, children's services agents, federal letter agency thugs, and every government actor that directly interfaces with the public to enforce the arbitrary will of governments. These are individually our most dangerous enemies. They are the ones most likely to directly use violence upon the innocent. 3. Those who knowingly facilitate the order givers and the order executors. This is the widest group with the widest definition, therefore the most difficult to classify accurately. It includes mainstream media writers, personalities, and news directors. It's the corporate leaders that oversee the military-industrial complex, the central banking complex, and secondary workers in the prison-industrial complex. It's the mid-level government bureaucrats, the mid-level corporate dealmakers, the clergy that have sold their soul to the almighty state. It is the software writers, hardware developers, and hackers that betray the entire information technology sector while doing the dirty work for their state masters by facilitating the surveillance industry. In short, these people are the willful hands and fingers of the state. 2-3. Neutrals. The word neutral has its origins in the same word as neuter. Neuter is the castration of a male pet, and in the context of this discussion, that may be the best possible definition of those who are neither our friends nor our enemies. One of the most successful methods of the state throughout history has been to virtually neuter the bulk of the population, leaving them as little more than docile house pets. The most serious danger neutrals present to us is their tendency to bark and whine, alerting their masters as to our presence and our activities. Sometimes it's easy to confuse these eunuchs with actual enemies, but it's important to understand the distinction. We must never aggress upon the neutrals. We must always keep in mind that they are victims of the state. It is our job to set them free, not punish them for their lack of understanding. Never compromise this foundational principle. Rights do not depend on knowledge nor on understanding. Rights cannot be deigned a person based on ignorance. Therefore, we must always treat the neutrals as non-combatants and grant them the same respect as we do our friends. Their lives, their safety, and their property must be preserved and respected. Final thoughts on neutrals. As they are many of us have been, as we are now, they may someday be. That said, neutrals can never be trusted. Never so long as they remain neutrals can they be trusted. Even after they awake, former neutrals should be carefully observed and tested. It's only as they prove themselves with small things that you may begin to trust them on bigger things. However, always use caution. The effects of the state can linger. 3. Motivating the saboteur. To incite our friend to the active practice of simple sabotage and to keep him practicing that sabotage over sustained periods is a special problem. Simple sabotage is often an act which our friend performs according to his own initiative and inclination. Acts of destruction do not bring him any personal gain and may be completely foreign to his habitually libertarian attitude toward people, property, and services. Also, the tendency to respect property may be a particular burden when encouraging our friend to do that which may seem contrary to the disposition of a good and peaceful person. Objections regarding the destruction of property, while seemingly noble, are based on a wrong-headed understanding of the violent nature of the state and the stolen hoards and possessions the state has amassed. Also, in reference to slacktivism, purposefully acting stupid is contrary to human nature. He may frequently need guidance, encouragement, stimulation, assurance, information, and suggestions regarding feasible methods of using that kind of simple sabotage. 3-1 Personal Motives. 3-1.1 The ordinary person very probably has no immediate personal motive for committing simple sabotage. Instead, he must be made to anticipate indirect personal gain, such as might come with the fall of the state or destruction of the ruling elite and their minions. Gains should be stated as specifically as possible for the area addressed. Simple sabotage will hasten the day when Commissioner X and his deputies Y and Z will be thrown out, when particularly obnoxious regulations and prohibitions will be abolished, when taxation will end, and so on. Abstract verbalizations about personal liberty, freedom of the press, and so forth will not be convincing in most parts of the world. In many areas, they will not even be comprehensible. 3-1.2. Since the effect of his own acts of sabotage are limited, the saboteur may become discouraged unless he feels that he is a member of a larger, though unseen, group of like-minded saboteurs operating against the enemy of humanity throughout the world. Several methods can be used to encourage the friend saboteur. Helping them gain access to the dark web or guiding them towards podcasts or other sources of information may help. Along these lines, statements praising the effectiveness of simple sabotage can be collected and then published on the dark web, on Freedom Radio, on podcasts, and other forms of subversive media. Estimates of the proportion of the population engaged in sabotage can be disseminated. Instances of successful sabotage already are talked about negatively by the mouth of the state, so using their news reports while giving them a positive spin can be of great encouragement and should not be that difficult. However, all care should be taken to avoid exposing the identity and the personal details of our friends. This should always be of the utmost concern. All information disseminated should be continued and expanded while remaining compatible with security and individual safety. Those who understand OPSEC should put special effort into helping the Friend Saboteur Network become as educated as possible on the topic. Once the individual saboteur becomes more knowledgeable on the topic, he will be more confident to download material from the internet and utilize the darknet. 3-1.3. The next step in motivating the local friend saboteur is to create a situation in which the friend saboteur acquires a sense of responsibility and begins to educate others in what he has learned about the art of simple sabotage. Ideally, establishing a base of operations where training and encouragement of new friends would develop and branch out with yet more bases of operation. Few things encourage a person to learn their craft as intensively as teaching, since you must learn the craft in order to effectively teach. And as you teach, you gain a sense of ownership in your students and in your organization. Three -2. Encouraging slacktivism along with disruption and destruction, D&D. It should be pointed out to the saboteur where the circumstances are suitable that he is acting in self-defense against our common enemy or retaliating against our enemy for other acts of D&D, but in all cases he is a saboteur because he is trying to stop the state from further atrocities upon the innocent, and the faster we destroy the state, the more innocent lives we save. Our friend should constantly be reassured that he is not initiating aggression, but is acting in defense of the powerless. Also, a reasonable amount of humor in the presentation of suggestions for simple sabotage will relax tensions and fear. Again, and as always, an emphasis on non-aggression against the innocent and respect for true private property must be maintained. While engaging in slacktivism, the saboteur may have to reverse his thinking, and he should be told this in so many words. Where he formerly thought of keeping his tools sharp, he should now let them grow dull. Surfaces that formerly were lubricated now should be sanded. Normally diligent, he should now be lazy and careless, and so on. Once he is encouraged to think backwards, he'll see many opportunities in his immediate environment which cannot possibly be seen from a distance. A state of mind should be encouraged that anything can be sabotaged, and every little act is a strike against the enemy of humanity. Among the potential friend saboteurs who are to engage in D&D, two extreme types may be distinguished. On the one hand, there is the friend who is not technically trained and employed. Wait staff, trash collectors, janitors, roofers, groundskeepers, meter readers, dog walkers, and anyone in the service industry. This activist can use specific suggestions as to how he can and should employ D&D, as well as details regarding the tools and means by which D&D is safely accomplished. Direct two-way communications with someone who has experience in the same field will be tremendously helpful and encouraging. These friend saboteurs are extremely important in the overall operation, since they can be both numerous and, because of their jobs, they can provide critical information to the wider network as to the movements of targets and the daily lives of enemy personnel. They can be as important in gathering information about our targets as they are in actually committing simple sabotage directly. At the other extreme is the man who is a technician, a specialist, a journeyman, an engineer, a manager, or a system administrator. Positions such as an equipment operator, automobile mechanic, network administrator, electrician, or fire suppression professional are critical for infiltration and for training other saboteurs. Presumably, this activist would be able to devise methods of simple sabotage which would be appropriate to his own facilities. However, this man needs to be stimulated to reorient his thinking in the direction of D&D. Specific examples, which need not be from his own field, should accomplish this. Keeping always in mind our enemy is the state, its governments, and its crony corporations, not the lives and property of those just trying to live their lives in peace. Various media may be used to disseminate suggestions and information regarding simple sabotage. Portable drives can be used for drive drops, where a thumb drive or the equivalent can be stashed in a public place. Our friend can sit down at a table, grab the drive from its hidden spot, plug it into his device accessing the info, then put the drive back for the next friend. He may add info to the drive at the same time. Or the drive can simply be picked up and taken to a safe location. A public library, a coffee shop, a highway, roadside rest area, or a public park are all good places for such activity. Other methods may be, as the immediate situation dictates, podcasts using code words and phrases, local freedom radio, blog posts, social media, the dark web, handouts at various gatherings such as concerts, or other methods. Instructions and suggestions may be directed toward specific geographic or occupational areas, or they may be general in scope. Finally, activists may be trained in the art of simple sabotage in anticipation of a time when they may be able to be directly involved or communicate this information directly to other of our friends, but may not be actively engaged at that time, a sort of sleeper cell waiting for activation.